Call Her Mommy, the MILF Manifesto, where motherhood is messy, MILFs are unhinged, and naps are a fantasy. Welcome to motherhood.
Hello, you guys. Welcome to Call Her Mommy, the MILF Manifesto. Today's episode is going to be super real and vulnerable and raw, I guess you could say. I am going to be sharing both my birth stories. So I guess I can input a trigger warning here. I am not holding back on any details. I am sharing it. It is my story. It is how I remember the events. So if you are pregnant and going to be delivering soon, and you are absolutely scared shitless, you might want to not watch this or listen to this until after you give birth. Or if you're like me and you just want to hear people's birth stories, go for it. So yeah, let's get into it. So I have two boys. Boy, mom. I thought that this hat was fitting for today's episode. Okay, so backstory. I talk about this pretty much all the time, but I have really bad anxiety. I have probably all my life. I can remember having anxiety in kindergarten, but that's a whole nother story. So when I found out I was pregnant, I was so excited, but I was also scared absolutely shitless, like most of us are. I was terrified of all the side effects, or like the not side effects, that's not what I want to say, the symptoms, like trimester symptoms, what was going to happen to me physically, mentally, all the things. And I am very petite, and my both pregnancies, I was all belly. So I got very like front heavy. Supposedly you couldn't really tell I was pregnant from the back. I didn't get wide. I just expanded to the front. So my first son, I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I was very anxious. So I dove deep into TikTok, into Reels, into Instagram, finding information and all the things I could about what would happen during delivery, because my plan was to go natural. I was not opposed to C-sections like some people are. And hey, every mom is different. They want what they want, and that is totally fine. I just wanted my baby to be healthy and myself to be healthy, and I just wanted a good delivery, whether it was natural, C-section, whatever. I just wanted both myself and my child to be okay. So I was late. Everybody was like, "You're so big, you're gonna go," like blah blah blah, and it was like, okay. But I was doing everything: curb walking, pineapple, massaging, like all the things you can think of to induce labor. Your girl was doing it. Nothing effing worked. I was having Braxton Hicks for like months, but things were getting intense. So on Mother's Day, it was 2 days past my due date, and my husband and I went to like one of those like acai bowl places that we know, and I wanted a pineapple smoothie because pineapple can induce contractions. And I was like, let's get this party started. That would be so cool if I have my first kid on Mother's Day. So I pounded that pineapple smoothie like it was nobody's business. And sure enough, that night, my contractions started. And I was like, yo, this stuff works. So it was Mother's Day night, and my contractions really started. My husband was like so excited. We were like excited, giddy, nervous, all the things. I was bouncing on that big ass exercise ball, rolling around, timing my contractions. And then I was like, this is getting real. I texted my mom and I was like, hey, contractions have started. We're timing them. Be on call, because my mom was also going to be in the delivery room with me and my husband. So I call the hotline, or the doctor's line, the on-call line. That's what I'm looking for. I call the on-call line, and it was like one of the midwives that I had seen just like through our practice. And I knew one of the doctors that was on call. And she was like, it sounds like it's getting real. Like, I might be seeing you in a couple of hours. She said, if you can eat something, eat something. And if you can rest, rest. Take a couple of hours. Cause like they were still kind of far apart. So I was like, okay. So I tried to go to sleep. I went to sleep and woke up the next morning and nothing. My water hadn't broken, like nothing. I had stalled out. And I was like, okay. I was still a little contraction-y, I guess. But like nothing. So we were kind of going through our day, like just kind of like, okay, like this could be it. Like today could be the day. The bags were already like in the car from the night before. And I had lunch, but my stomach was like rock hard. Like think of a basketball when it's like blown up and it's so hard. That's what my stomach felt like, and I couldn't feel my son moving. And after lunch, I was like, usually like after I eat or drink something, like he's moving a little bit, and I didn't feel anything. So I panicked. I called the doctors. They were going to bring me in, and they were like, you know what? Just go right to the hospital. And I was like, holy shit. Now, this is where it gets really real. I remember bawling to my husband, like, we are so close. What if he's gone? And I just remember being so scared because I didn't feel movement. I was pushing, I was doing everything to feel him, and I couldn't feel anything. We get to the hospital, they put me in triage, and they hooked the monitor up right away. And the sigh of relief I felt when I heard his heartbeat was like no, like nothing else. And I know so many women can relate to that. So I heard his heartbeat and I was like, okay. I was having contractions, but I was not dilated at all. Like zero. If there was like negative, I was probably in the negatives. So one of the doctors came in and was like, listen, because you're past due, you're pretty large. And I was very uncomfortable. They were like, we can induce you now, or you can schedule your induction for later this week. And I was just like, I'm not ready. Like, I wanted to like cuddle with my dog. I wanted to like have like, like my last couple of nights or moments where I was like felt prepared. So I said I would schedule it. So that was Monday evening, and we scheduled it for Wednesday. So Tuesday, my husband and I spent the day together. We were like kind of giddy, like, oh my God. But I was also like, could I go into labor now? So we go through everything. Fast forward to Wednesday morning. We call because we had to call to make sure there was like a bed available, or they were like, we'll delay you. So they were like, eat breakfast and then come in. So I was like, okay. So I ate some oatmeal, really get myself that energy. I had some oatmeal and we drove in, and we were at the hospital by like 6:45 that morning. We called my mom and we said, listen, they have to check me in, do all the things. So like, take your time coming. So she was like, okay. Now, I'm sure many women can relate to this. The absolute fear I felt walking into that hospital, knowing I was leaving with a baby, was like terrifying. I got into the hospital room and I started having a panic attack. The time we got into the room was during the nurse's shift change. So like I saw a nurse, she like brought me in, told me like, hey, get undressed, do this, do this. And then the nurses will be coming around to do rounds in a little bit. And I was like, okay. And delivery rooms, at least in my hospital, are very, very small, because the suites where you are like after you have your baby are like luxurious, we'll say. So the room was very, very tiny, and I immediately felt really claustrophobic. I saw all the machines. I saw the machine for like when the baby is delivered. I just saw all this stuff and I started panicking. I refused to put the gown on, I think. Or maybe I put the gown on. I can't remember. I was like dry heaving in the bathroom, pacing, sweating, panicking. And then a nurse came in and she was like, are you okay? And I was like, so like, can I just have a C-section? And she was like, you're here for an induction. And I was like, yeah, but like, I'm panicking. I'm freaking the fuck out. Just cut me open and get this baby out. And she was like, sweetheart, it's okay. Thank God, because the nurses were so kind and like supportive. They weren't nasty. They were so reassuring. And my husband was like, your turn. You deal with her. And they kind of were like, listen, we can bring the on-call doctor in and you can talk to her, but like we have to admit you regardless of what avenue you go through. So I was like, okay. And they said to me, and I had had a couple of sips of water when I got to the hospital and like when I was home to like help my anxiety, to like cool my mouth down, all the things. So she turns to me and goes, okay, but just know that if you opt to have a C-section, you can't eat or drink anything for the next X amount of hours, or the anesthesiologists won't administer anything. And I was like, challenge accepted. She was like, when was the last time you ate or drank? And I was like, I ate before I came here and I just had a couple of sips of water. And she was like, well, then you can't eat or drink anything. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. So they coaxed me into the bed. They got me set up. The doctor came in, and thank God I had the doctor that I did. I had not met her. Excuse me, in the office. I was like supposed to, but like it just never worked out, like scheduling, whatever. So she was like an angel sent from heaven. She was so calming and zen and sweet and supportive. And she was like, you got this, mama. And they said all the right things. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try. But I knew, and with somebody with anxiety and like mental health stuff, I always need an escape plan. I always have to have a backup plan. So I asked them, if it becomes too much, or I get tired, or I start to freak out, can I stop the induction and have a C-section? And once I heard that I could, whether I really could or who knows, they were like, yes. And I said, okay. So they started the induction process. I had the balloon. So if you've had the balloon, I've heard mixed things from different moms. Some people say it's not that bad. Others are like, this is a fucking torture device, all the things. From what I remember, it wasn't bad. It was more awkward and uncomfortable than anything. And it looks like partial snowman. It's like two bulbs. They shove up you. It expands. It's supposed to help you like dilate, all this stuff. And then they either pull it out or it just pops out on its own. So here I am laying in the bed with my mom was there by this time. I'm laying in the bed with my mom and my husband, like in the room. And I was like covered and I was on my side. And they said you could start to feel cramping. And I was like, okay. Immediately I felt cramps and I was like, oh, contractions kind of started. I had been having contractions. So they kind of like intensified a little, but it was nothing. And after about, I want to say like an hour and a half, the balloon popped. Like I felt something weird and I was like, I think my water may have broken or something. So they called the nurses in and my mucus plug had like come out and I was kind of like leaking that fluid. So the balloon came out and then they said to me, we're going to start you on Pitocin. And I was like, hell no. And they were like, not your choice. Like, you have to have this baby. Like, we're going to start you on Pitocin. And I was like, no, I've heard horrible things. I don't want that in my body. And they were like, well, that's the next step. And I was like, okay, like, fine. And they were like, it's not going to be a lot. We're going to do very little. So I was like, okay, fine. So I was trying to distract myself and waiting for them because they had to like send it in, have it approved, whatever. Well, it never came because my contractions went from 0 to 100 like that. My body was like, girl, you don't need the Pitocin. We're going to crank you into high gear. So I just remember my husband, God bless his soul, had a soccer game on the TV. And if you know us, like we are soccer players through and through. We're a soccer family, golf family, all the stuff. So he had a soccer game on the TV. And I remember having like all the monitors, like the things strapped to me and like bouncing on the ball and like wiggling and just being uncomfortable and just rocking. He would have to rock me when an intense contraction would hit. And if you've ever had a baby or like you've seen this stuff, like they have monitors. So like they could see like me spiking and when like they were really, really bad. And my mom and my husband apparently were looking at each other like, oh shit, this is a big one. And I was just rocking, closing my eyes. And I remember looking at the clock and watching the game. And at 3:33, a contraction hit that was so intense. And I looked at my husband and I said, it's time for the epidural. I'm not Superwoman. It's time for the epidural. And he was like, okay. They called the anesthesiologist. Everybody came in. I got my epidural. And then I had like, I want to say like I was really like I was dilating very quickly by like before the epidural. I think I was like from 2 to 8, right? Or like the balloon, I was like at 5. Like I was dilating and like my body was like going through it. And all the nurses were like, girl, like this is so good. Like you're going to have this baby in no time. So here I am like, okay, I'm a freaking champ. Then the epidural hits and I feel nothing. I was like, this is great. But they had me on the peanut ball after like I was able, like the epidural had settled, and I was able to move. And they were like, do you feel anything? And I was like, no. They were like, do you feel pressure? And I was like, no. My doctor came in and checked me and she was like, you're right there. I think she said I was 10 centimeters or like 8. I can't remember, but my water hadn't broken yet. And I remember she was doing a check. I feel like she was elbow deep and she was like, your water hasn't, there it goes. And my water broke like on my doctor. And I was like, sorry. And so then we were just like waiting and the shift change, I think happened. And like still like nothing. And at 9 o'clock p.m., they were like, all right, let's start pushing. Let's do a few practice pushes. So I was like, okay. So I did a push and I couldn't feel anything. Because of the epidural. And then they were like trying to coax me like what to do, but I was like, I can't feel anything. Like, am I doing it? And then they were, after like 2 pushes, they were like, we see the head. And I was like, look at me. Like, okay, I'm going to be one of those moms that pushes this sucker out in like 4 pushes. Joke's on me, because my pelvis, I had held pelvis separation throughout the whole pregnancy. So my pelvis had shifted. Also, I'm tiny. So my baby's head would come down, but he couldn't get through the birth canal. So I didn't know this, but with your birth canal, it's kind of like a downward and like an under, like a swoop. And he would come, but then he would suck right back up. So I could not physically push him out. I pushed for 3.5 hours. Mind you, I hadn't really eaten a lot because my fucked up mind was like, listen, if I need a C-section, I'm not going to eat. Now, I had eaten a little bit and drank a little bit because I was like, okay, my body needs it. I remember just pushing and pushing. And because I couldn't feel anything, they turned my epidural down and they put me on Pitocin. A very slow drip of Pitocin, but Pitocin nonetheless. And then I could feel everything. And the contractions were unreal. My mom is behind my head. My husband's got one leg. I have a gay male nurse. Bless him. He was fabulous. I love him. He had my other leg. And then the doctors would be in, or the doctor and like midwives would come in and out to like check my progress. And I just remember them being like, you got this. They were so freaking encouraging, pushing my legs, telling me what to do. One point I threw up on myself and I was just like, oh my God. And of course my doctor was like, that was the best push. Do it again, minus the throw up. And I was like, bitch, you crazy. And sure enough, I just couldn't do it. So the doctors looked at me and she said, we have a couple of choices. You can continue, but your body and your mind, like you are physically like pretty much you're close to being done. Like your body just can't do much more. We could try the vacuum or we can just bring you for a C-section. And I said, I have been trying so hard. I want to try a little longer. The girl who walked in there wanting a C-section wants to continue pushing for a little bit. And they were like, okay. I said, I will try the vacuum. Listen, if you've done the vacuum, oof. My husband told me it was the worst thing he's ever seen. I was pushing and I was like crying and pushing and in so much pain. And he just said to me, whatever you do, keep pushing, and do not open your eyes. Okay, I believe you. Like, I don't know what's happening. They tried it once or twice and nothing. Now, mind you, I had gone from one nurse and a doctor and an occasional midwife checking in, maybe two nurses, to an entire like room full of people. I had a team for me. I had a team for the baby. I had a midwife and the two on call doctors in the room. I think the entire labor and delivery unit was in my room at one point. And now I'm like, oh my God. And the doctor who delivered my first son was the lead doctor, bless her. And then the other on call doctor was like assisting, and she was the one who wound up delivering my second son. But she was in the room, and I remember her coming in and being like, "How are we doing?" And I was like, still making jokes at this point. I was like, I was fun until I was like, great until this sadist turned down my epidural, and my mother was like, "Oh, Courtney, how dare you?" So I was trying to like stay positive and keep light, but I was so tired. I was sweating. I was hot. I was miserable. And I was like literally only in a bra because my nurse had ripped off my gown after I threw up on myself. And I was like, I just don't want to throw up anymore. I want the baby out. And after they tried the vacuum once or twice, they said, we're calling it. We have to have an emergency C-section. And I started crying because I was just so done. I just remember looking back at my mom because they had taken my husband off to a different part in the room because he needed to gown up. Now, with C-sections, only one person's allowed with you in the room, at least in my hospital. I don't know if it's different in others. But I was so freaking nervous. I look at my mom, and now they have to like reconfigure the bed from a pushing bed to like a normal bed again so they can wheel me down. They have to cover me up, all this stuff. And now I'm just like, I'm still contracting. I look at my mom and she's like trying not to cry. And she's like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I don't know if I remember it, if I just remember because my mom had said it, but they said, one of the nurses was like, I will come back and let you know how everything goes. And my mom was like, okay. Now I didn't know it at the time, but she was left alone in that room. So we went from like a shit ton of people in the room to her being alone in that room with like still like the blood and the throat, like just like the trauma scene that was in the room. So they wheel me in, and now it's like an emergency situation because I've been pushing for 3 hours. I've lost blood. They need to get the baby out. And now I remember them having to transfer me from one bed to the other. And they're like, now I had the epidural hours prior. It's about like midnight now, after midnight. And now I've been pushing since like before 9 p.m. So they ask me, hey, can you slide to this bed? Like, help us slide you. And I was like, yeah. And then all of a sudden a contraction hits and they're like, are you having a contraction? And I wanted to be like, no, I'm just like, hanging out. Yes, I was having a contraction. So they get me down. Now my husband is still waiting because they have to prep me before he can come in. The anesthesiologists are behind my head. Now also, the last hour of pushing through my entire C-section, I was shaking. Whether it was the shock, it can happen. It's like a natural part of labor where your body shakes. I was shaking so bad and like my teeth were chattering. I could not stop the shaking. And I had warming blankets around me. I was like really freaking out. My husband's holding my hand. The anesthesiologists were great. They were talking me through every step. But I will never forget my doctor. I heard it because now I can't see anything. The curtain's up. I have everybody in the room. And I remember her starting the clock. And I could see the clock starting. And her saying, all right, people, listen up. She's been pushing for over 3.5 hours. And she's lost a lot of blood. We have to move, and we have to move now. It still gets me. And I freaked because at that point I was like, am I going to die? Is my baby okay? What is happening? And my husband just had his head right by me. And I just kept saying to the anesthesiologist, I can't stop shaking. And he was like, it's okay. It's okay. They talked me through it. And he told me, you're going to feel like a weird pulling, tugging, and that's them taking the baby out. And I felt it. And it was like I had tunnel hearing. I just couldn't hear anything. I almost heard just like the whooshing of the machines. And I can remember, I remember looking at my husband and saying, I don't hear him. And as a mother who has been through hell and back through her laboring, not hearing the baby cry, and he looked at me and he's like, what are you talking about? Listen. And I was like, I don't hear him. And now I'm crying. And all of a sudden it was like everything clicked and I heard him. And they were like, he's a big boy. He's good. He's good. And I was just like, holy shit, like the sobbing, everything. And then they eventually brought my husband over, took some pictures. He brought the camera over, showed me the pictures. And then finally they brought my son over. Yeah, it was wild. And I was wheeled into recovery. He was born just before 1 a.m. I was wheeled into recovery and I was still shaking. I couldn't get warm. My nurse stayed with me the entire time. Now, mind you, his dinner came when I was pushing and he never left my side. The nurses that I had were phenomenal. He never left my side through recovery. His dinner, he had his dinner, I think, like brought to him in like recovery, but I don't even know. My husband was with me and I said, go to my mom. I'm okay. Go to my mom. He's with me. So he was like, are you sure? Because he sat with me for a few and I was like, I'm just trying to get warm. I need to sleep. So I kind of passed out for a little and he went to my mom. And then he kind of sat with my mom for a bit and then he came down. They brought the baby to me. I breastfed for the first time in recovery. And it was just amazing, but I was so tired because by that point it was like past 4 a.m. because I had to stay in recovery for at least 2 hours. They kept me a little bit longer. I finally stopped shaking and then I was sweating my ass off. They brought me eventually to my room. My mom still had been there. And it was just like amazing. She got to meet her grandson. It was the grandson on both sides for the first time. So she met him first. And then they took him to the nursery for a little bit so I could get some rest. And they kept coming in and checking me and checking this and doing this. And yeah, that was my first son, Cash, being born. And I was so scared that I was not going to know what was happening. But I was okay. Like mother's instincts kick in, like you figure it out. The hormones are wild, I will tell you, when after you give birth and like all the things. Recovering from a C-section is not easy. I did it twice. First time obviously is so much harder. But yeah, I remember my nurse, God, Monica, oh, my girl. When I had Cash, Monica was like my day nurse both days, thank God. And she got me up, she got me walking. She really helped me kind of like with the C-section recovery, knowing what to do, don't push yourself, all the things. So yeah, my second son, when Carter was born, I had scheduled my C-section. I could have gone natural, but after having an 8 pound, almost 9 pound baby, I was like, yeah, no, not happening. So I scheduled my C-section. And let me tell you, if you have an emergency C-section and a scheduled C-section, they are completely different. I wanted the first slot, but I wound up getting the second slot. So I was actually delayed going in for my C-section because it was just delayed. So I was about an hour later. So I went in about noonish, but I was in the triage for a couple of hours. They have to admit you, hook you up, all the things. Once again, I was super anxious because in triage, like you can hear other patients that are coming in that are in labor, like whatever the case. So I brought headphones, thank God, and I just listened to like a meditation, music, Zen, calming, whatever. And I just sat there. I was looking at pictures. And now also I was like really nervous because I was going from one kid to two kids. And if you know me, my first son, Cash, is like my world. I love him. I was so nervous because he was almost two and I was having a baby. And I was just like, how is he going to react? Like all this stuff, all the fears of now going from one to two kids, everything. Um, and so I was just trying to find my Zen. And then they came in, my husband gowned up. Um, and then I walked into the OR for the second C-section. I walked in and they were like, this is so different. So I was making jokes with all the nurses. They were so nice. And I was like, this is what the OR looks like in here, like everything. They gave me the epidural, like spinal. So it's a little different than an epidural. It was just like a whatever. I can't even remember what it's called. And then they were like, you're going to feel it. And then I was like, whoa, I can't move my legs. So they had to help me lay down, all this stuff. And then I was like waiting for my husband. My doctors came in. I had phenomenal doctors once again. They were making jokes, all the stuff. And I was much more present, like aware of my surroundings, I think, because I was awake. Like I hadn't been exhausted from pushing and the induction for the whole day and everything like that. So they gave me like the meds, like all the stuff. They were talking, but because it wasn't rushed and it wasn't in an emergency, like they were having conversations like, oh, like, what are you guys doing? Like talking, all this stuff. And I was just like, I think I had my eyes closed most of the time. Just breathing, like meditative breathing. I was box breathing, like 4 in, 4 out, holding all the stuff. And my husband at one point was like, are you okay? And I was like, he was like, are you just trying to meditate? And I was like, yes. But I felt more. Not that I felt the pain, but I could feel the touch of the doctors more. And at one point, I remember looking at my husband, and now I'm like flat out, my arms are out. And I looked at him and I said, I think I can feel them moving. And then I realized very quickly that it was the doctors taking my insides out. So yeah, there was that because they cut through 7 layers. Um, and then the anesthesiologist and I think my doctors were like, all right, we're going to take him out. We're going to pull him out. And I just felt this like intense, like pulling and tugging. And it's weird because like your body is getting pulled. Like you can't feel it, but you can feel it. It's the weirdest sensation. Um, and they pulled him out and immediately he was screaming and crying and I was like, oh, thank God he's okay. Another 8 pounder, high up in the 8 pounds. He came out and I was like, oh my God, like I heard him. They put me like stitched me back. I did not have the shakes, like nothing like that. But I started to get really dizzy. And I was like, I told the anesthesiologist right away, and they were like, it's from probably the cocktail that we gave you, which was like a little morphine, fentanyl, whatever. I'm like, fentanyl, Jesus. But I had known that from the previous time. And they said it'll wear off in a couple of hours, like we'll take you to recovery. So they took me to recovery. I was kind of trying to sleep, and it was only when I would turn my head one way I would get really dizzy. So I kept telling my husband, I kept telling the nurses, and they were like, okay, it's also because you're probably dehydrated. You really haven't had like anything to drink. Yeah, we've given you IV, but it is, like it happens. It's normal from the medicines. So I was like, okay. So it started to subside. But at one point I was like, they wanted to sit me up and I was like, I can't hold my baby yet. Like I'm really still dizzy, which was heartbreaking. And then finally I was able to hold him. They wheeled me right down the hall to my room eventually. And like the dizziness had passed. My parents came, my in-laws came. We waited for my other son to meet the baby till the next day. But it was a completely different experience, but I was still really dizzy. I had the catheter in because it was a C-section, so awkward. So I wasn't moving. I was literally just laying in the bed. I was able to eat a little bit, but I just wasn't feeling like the best. So I think I like had some water, maybe a little ginger ale, some crackers. I think I had an oatmeal. like at night. And then I remember my nurse coming in around like 9 o'clock and was like, we're going to get you up now. We're going to have you walk to the bathroom and back, see how you do. And if you're okay, around midnight, we'll come in and take the catheter out. So I was like, okay. So I go to sit up and I'm like, I'm still really dizzy. And they were like, okay, we'll take it slow. And now I'm walking and I'm like, I don't feel well. Like, I'm really dizzy. And they were like, okay. So they were like, do you want to stay? Like, whatever. And I was like, I need to go back and lay in the bed. And they were like, okay. So I got back in the bed and I just like had my head down and I was just like, I want to sleep. So they were like, okay, we'll come back and check you. And I remember saying to her, when you come back or when you take the catheter out, do I have to walk and get up again? And she was like, no, you don't have to. There's like a time where, like, because I knew my catheter was going to be out, but I wasn't going to have like the diaper pad on. I was just going to be like on the bed, like the changing pads things. And they were like, no, we'll get you up. So I was like, okay. So she came in, she took it out. I felt a little bit better. I had like my vitals checked, whatever. I slept not the best. I had headphones in trying to sleep. I was just anxious about getting up. And about 3 or 4 a.m., I had to pee. And I was like, I'm not going to pee the bed. And I couldn't find the on-call button to call my nurse. So I'm trying to call to my husband. But like when you have a C-section, you have no core, your stomach muscles, everything. So I'm like, babe, trying to yell to him. Finally, he wakes up. He helps me get up because you can't get up by yourself. He gets me out of the bed, helps me to the bathroom, and I wasn't dizzy. And I was like, oh, thank you, God. I get back, I go to bed. They get me up, give me more they check my blood, do all the things. And then it turns out, once they got my blood back, I was anemic. So I don't know at what point in the pregnancy I became anemic, but it wasn't like severe. It was just slight. So I had to take iron pills. So they were giving me iron pills in the hospital. I didn't need the infusions like some of my other friends or people I know do, but I just needed the pills. I still take iron pills just to keep it at, like to make sure I'm okay. And I made a joke to the nurse. I was like, how am I anemic? I had a steak dinner before I went into labor. I like had my C-section. And she was like, I don't know. But that was like the different thing. Oh, another thing, I had some allergic reaction or reaction to the meds, where I was so itchy. My face and my chest were so fucking itchy. I just was itching so much. And they were like, we can give you a Benadryl. But I was like, listen, I don't want any more meds in my system. Like, I'm still so dizzy because this was like afterwards. And I remember like rubbing my nose. I have pictures where my nose is raw and bruised. And anytime I touched my nose, it was raw because I was like numb, kind of, I guess. So when I would rub, I like didn't know that it was like bruising. And then the nurse was like giving me a cold cloth. So that lasted about 24 hours, give or take, which was wild. So both birth experiences were so completely different, where the first time was an emergency. It was its own traumatic experience. And then the second time, like the C-section part was easier, but like the recovery was worse because I was dizzy and I had like the like reaction of itchiness, which was crazy. But yeah, birth is wild. I don't feel like one of those moms or one of those people that's like, I had a C-section, so I like took the easy way. Like, there's just different opinions, and I don't care. My boys are both happy and healthy and amazing, and I was okay, they were okay, and that's all I wanted at the end of the day, was both births to be okay. I didn't want anything bad to happen, and we were very lucky. We both were okay. Both boys were okay during delivery. So yeah, those are my birth stories. But I'm very curious. I love hearing other birth stories from other mothers, whether they went natural, they went C-section, how long their inductions were, how long it took them that when labor started. I know some people that got to the hospital and 5 minutes later the baby was out, and I know people that are like 4 days later the baby was out. So drop a comment, tag me, let me know your birth story. I would love to hear it, because maybe I will share some of them in future episodes. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And stay tuned because things are just going to continue to get crazier. I know today's episode was a little tamer and more like raw and vulnerable. Not that they're not raw and vulnerable, but it was just my stories that I just wanted to share. So thank you for listening and watching, and I will see you next time on Call Her Mommy, the MILF Manifesto. Bye, guys.